Why do you think some people believe in things that are said to be false or at best dubious? And why do you think someone would still choose to believe something they know or feel even slightly is false? Okay. These things are complicated, and there's probably a bunch of reasons. One of the reasons could be that they don't think that it's false, or they don't think that it's dubious. It could be that they actually don't care as much about what they're saying or what they're indicating in this sense, because there's something that's more true than that. Like there's something that's more morally prioritized than that, whether that's their what they're doing socially, what they're implying by saying that thing to be false. Everyone believes in the truth at this fundamental level that I just said. So even though they might have an inclination that something is false in some sense, they're able to rationalize getting to the why it would be true in some other sense. So this goes back to what we've been talking the past few days, what Jonathan Haidt said, where we feel our moral truth first, we feel our rational truth first, and then we rationalize it afterwards. We come up with the reasons why afterwards. We're post hoc trying to make sense of why we felt that way. And that often leads people to behave in a way that you might think is bad faith, when they're really just trying to operate towards the truth that they're feeling. Now, also, what's going on here, and to answer your second question, is and why do you think someone would still choose to believe in something they know or feel even slightly is false? And the answer is always going to be because it would be very uncomfortable for them to not do that, or they don't even have the courage or mechanism to abide by what they're seeing is maybe false. So like social dynamics could make you not deal with the possibility of something being false. Like social dynamics can make you feel like this is a better path because this is actually leading to alleviating the social discomfort that I'm feeling in this moment. And that's what I think affects a lot of people. Now, once you get there, though, you become where you believe the thing is false or true. You get to a point where you have actually internalized the feeling and you didn't respond when you should have. So this idea of paying attention to when your brain tells you something is actually a skill that you have to build. First is a skill in mindfulness of paying attention to the thing, and then it's also a skill in once you notice that you could possibly be wrong, it's a skill of actually doing it. Because if you let that go too many times, then you're not gonna, it's either it won't even manifest for you or you won't have the will to do it. And this is one of those scenarios where willpower isn't what's actually getting you to do it over time. You're making it such that the willpower necessary is lessened. I don't think you choose to believe something false, right? In a lot of these cases, it's not completely conscious. It's a lot of times unconscious. This is false, or I feel that is false, but I'm going to choose to believe it anyway. Yeah, so I don't think that people often have like that type of full thought in their head, and they defend it absolutely. I think a lot of times this thing happens like at an unconscious level to some extent. Like even if you were to tell someone and you were to give them the reasons why something is false, that's not what, as we've talked about in the past, that isn't the type of experience that they require in order to get them to believing that is false. We like to think that reasons are what leads you from something that's true to something that's false, but what's really necessary is for them to be open to the experience of getting there. And if they are not open for that and they find it very uncomfortable, they won't be able to do that. I don't take it that's their belief, though. I take that to be their statements. Yeah, it's something like that. Like their belief, their true belief, like the belief that they're actually acting out, that they're feeling, that they're allowing their own drives to take them. Because once again, our view in this document is one where we only really like kind of get a hold of our life when we take some sort of reflective hold, and even that can be trained, right? We're finding out that mindfulness is something that allows us to even get a better hold of ourselves when we be mindful in the moment. Otherwise, either your mindfulness can't combat against the thoughts that are trying to jump in your head, as you find will be the case when you try mindfulness meditation. It's very difficult to keep that control. But when people are not even reflecting in the moment, specifically on their ability to take control of this moment, then they're just subject to being pushed all over the place by their internal drives. Imagine they're distracted. They're distracted with the emotional feelings that are happening in this moment, as they are heavily biased towards a certain direction, and for them that direction is true in some visceral sense. And you know, a lot of times something that's very intuitive is like sometimes someone gives you a really good argument as to why something is the case, and you don't have a counter argument right now, but you know somehow in some intuition that you've heard a counter argument that actually combats that. So you're in this weird position where you don't know why you feel like you can't buy into what they just said. You know, you have this other thing looming. Now, the other case is like someone's mentioned something and you know that you have a count, like, yeah, I guess this is the same thing. You know that you wish you could be able to say all the reasons why what they said is not right, and you're trying to. You're trying to give reasons. You're trying to make sense of this intuition that you have. But what they gave you was not an effective enough experience for you to have changed that intuition. Your intuition is still telling you, hey, there's something that this person is missing out of the equation that perhaps you can give them. And then you post hoc try to rationalize your thoughts, and perhaps you somewhat get a sense, or like you try to touch on that intuition, but chances are you don't touch on that intuition perfectly, especially in the heat of the moment. This is what happens all the time. So I think we have to go into this whole what's happening when people are debating and talking about these things. And I don't think it's just two people are giving back and forth reasons, and if only you had enough reasons, you would get to the right answer and your mind would be changed. There's also this thing where, for example, a part of a specific group will try to frame everything their group does in a manner that'll be advantageous to them or seem good in a colloquial sense, right? Because they're right now operating under this idea that their group is good, and to get information, the possibility that their group has done something that's not good is difficult, and they could either be courageous and accept that and consider how that might be the case, or they are not courageous and consider how that might be the case by making some rationalization for it, by making it not actually indicative of the group being bad in a sense, but it's actually that the group's good because of this other reason that negates what you just said. So like all this stuff is always at play. Tribalism, yeah. Out of curiosity, if the document prescribes searching for a moral system and following it, what methods does it prescribe for avoiding bad moral system? Perfect. I don't know. Well, we have to figure. I mean, you have to base. I think it's the same thing that I just said. You have to base it in something that's tangible. So perhaps the document can actually say, hey, you actually have a moral responsibility to also look for alternative views, alternative moral views. You have to go and learn different cultures. You have to try to understand why they think the things that they think. Like you have a moral, not because you have to become what they are, but by putting in the effort to being open that you can understand something that you don't currently know, that at least primes you to be able to change your understanding of what is moral in a way that might deter what you're saying are like bad moral systems, right? The issue is that there is no such thing as a good moral system or a bad moral system inherently. So you have to have some sort of tangible gauge as to how you can go about that, and it's got to involve learning. I don't think there's any way against it. You have to learn new information, because even something like well-being is something that's kind of culturally contingent. You know, you could say that, like, obviously, you know, suffering is a universal, but yeah, for some people that might not, you know, it might be the case that society wants something else, like, you know, regardless of how much suffering it takes for humans to strive, we want humans to persist. So that's actually a slightly different moral than the lack of suffering. Because you could say that if we really just wanted the lack of suffering, then why don't we just get rid of everyone, right? That's the terrible position that comes from that. And then the question is, you know, how much suffering do we want based on how much living and positive well-being do we want? So these are all these like really ambiguous moral values that we have to figure out how much of each do we want. And, you know, how does this play out practically? How have other people done this? How do other people say to do it? You have to go out into the world. You got to learn. As Jordan Peterson says, you have to go out and slay the dragon. So there is information that you do not know everywhere you look in other religions, in other spiritualities, in other countries, in other cultures. You have to go out and you have to slay those dragons in the sense that you have to take the chaos that is currently there. And it's uncomfortable to go and learn and do this type of thing because it might make you feel like you're doing something that's wrong. And you have to slay the dragon in the sense of you got to put it into boxes. You have to make order out of it. You got to figure out, you got to make sense of why they would be doing that. And so this is where we end up in our moral framework. Now the question is, how much should you do that? That's an issue. This is it's very difficult to navigate the world. This is why people have these like existential questions. There's no like right answer. So it's always going to be a constant practice of figuring out how much you should be doing of each of these things that I've been saying. And you have to leverage yourself, your own conscience, as some sort of gauge. And then you have to leverage, in some sense, what the document's saying as a gauge of like, hey, like perhaps you should be doing this thing to make sure that you're not falling into some bad moral system. One of the things that the document's going to say you should do is be cognizant of the social groups that you're in, the media that you're taking in. What is your information diet? That's all going to affect where you end up in terms of your moral understanding. So we're gonna have to talk about all this stuff. There's a lot of stuff to talk about in part 3 as well. I haven't even come close to outlining it. But we'll get there maybe in 2027. Okay, thanks. It's always very strange though, because you can't help but ask why. It's why I believe debates aren't really effective. I honestly do think taking an atheist to the Sistine Chapel would do more to convince them that God exists than any argument. I agree. I think what would be a really effective exercise is figuring out what is actually the optimal way to behave in a debate if you're actually looking to change their mind or change viewers' minds. And that's something that we should do on this channel because I'm going to be on this screen. Like I'm going to be inherently an influencer, right? So I got to figure out what would be the optimal way to get people to do these things for their own sake in many of these cases. I'm trying to sell self-help stuff. So I need to be effective at selling the things that I think will actually help people out. And it's going to be tricky because a lot of the stuff that lays foundation to our self-help stuff is the difficult philosophical stuff that will conflict with other people's views. So that's why we probably don't want to always just jump down into the philosophical. Granted, I don't mind doing that now because we have got this, relatively small viewership. But at some point, I have to be very mindful of how much we should be in the weeds, how much we should be just talking about the self-help stuff, which is really kind of what our channel's trying to do. So I'm very much a believer in most of stuff being value-based at the bottom. So for example, the cognitive dissonance on saying something you don't believe probably be due to some value overriding the value of evaluating your true beliefs and saying the truth, etc. Maybe the value of something infallible, etc. Sorry, big topic, small text box. Hey, no, good point. So that's kind of one of the things that we want to also be paying attention to in our own life. And that's actually why part 2 starts out with a discussion of our automated behavior. Like what is driving us? What are these underlying values that maybe we haven't even accepted or maybe we don't even like, right? Addiction's like the obvious example. It's like there's something where we wish we weren't doing it and, we keep doing it though. So, in the case of social dynamics, being cognizant that your social dynamics are going to affect what you feel, what you believe. So having that ability to pay attention to that is a huge tool. This is where we talk about biases. We're going to have to talk about cognitive biases, social dynamics, dealing with trauma, decoy effects, zero price effect, all these things that are affecting our experience of behavior in the moment. All right, so to clarify, the way your document prescribes avoiding bad moral systems is by prescribing learning about multiple moral systems. To clarify, my document does not know what good and bad moral systems are. That's the point. So given the fact that you don't know what is a good and a bad moral system, the only thing that can give you a better direction towards what might be good and what might be bad is learning, like figuring out. Because imagine that at every moment you've already learned stuff. You're at a certain state. How do you know what you currently know, what you currently understand is good or bad, like in that direction? You're always at a point where you have to learn more. It's a constant for the rest of your life. You have to be open to new information that can tell you whether or not what you believe is actually right. That goes back to what we just said about objective truth. We know that we can be wrong. There's many times where I think something's right and it turns out being wrong. That's the same with moral understandings. Just, you can never assume that you've arrived at the end. That's the whole point about assaulting this notion that just because we feel like something is certain, therefore it must be certain. So it prescribes learning at the most fundamental sense. It's not that you have to read these certain books. It doesn't mean you have to learn in a certain way. That's up to you to figure out what you feel like would be the most effective way to learn. But the one thing that we need to be to make the reader cognizant of is that is the possibility that you aren't doing enough that will lead you out of the bad. As long as you feel like you're doing what's right in the moment, then you're chilling. But you have to, you can't just let that go. You have to recurrently reflect upon whether or not you're doing what is right. And this leads, this is a very huge responsibility. This is one of the reasons why Jordan Peterson always says, when you just ask your brain what you should be doing, it's going to be uncomfortable. And imagine that you can't just do that once. You have to do that, and you have to do that again, and you have to do that again. And the goal is to actually change your brain such that it's easier to do that. That's like one of the things that is involved in the fact that this is a practice. This is a skill to be gained. It's a skill of freedom. Now, first in the part one, it's a skill of freedom in the non-moral sense, but you can build the skill of navigating of ambiguous morality in the world.